The night sky glittered with unfamiliar stars. Ryan, a reserved and observant human, strolled through the woods on the outskirts of the small town. His evenings were always the same, seeking solitude, breathing in the scent of pine, and losing himself in thoughts. Tonight, however, the tranquility was shattered by an eerie, shimmering light that pulsed through the treetops. Curiosity got the better of him. Following the glow, he reached a clearing where something extraordinary awaited, a small, sleek spacecraft embedded in the ground, faintly humming as if alive. Standing before it was a tiny figure no taller than a child, with pale lavender skin that seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight. Her wide, shimmering eyes darted nervously as she clutched a device that sparked and fizzed. Ryan stepped forward cautiously. The little alien froze, trembling as if he were the monster in this story. Her gaze locked onto him, and he noticed how fragile she appeared. Yet, her expression was fierce, her tiny fingers gripping the device tightly. "Are you hurt?" Ryan asked softly, trying not to scare her. He knelt to appear less threatening. The alien girl hissed, her small melodic voice trembling as she raised the device in what seemed like a defensive stance. "Stay back, human," she said in halting words, her accent heavy and musical. "You eat us. Devour us." Ryan blinked in surprise. "Eat you?" He couldn't help but chuckle, though he quickly realized his mistake when she flinched. "I don't eat people, especially not, visitors from space." The alien tilted her head, clearly skeptical but curious. "Not lie. Humans. Big. Hungry." He sat cross-legged, keeping a respectful distance. "I promise I won't hurt you. What's your name?" The girl hesitated, her wide eyes scanning him for deceit. "Nimala," she whispered. Her voice softened, though her grip on the sparking device remained firm. "I'm Ryan," he said, offering a small smile. "Your ship looks damaged. Do you need help?" Nimala hesitated again, her small frame quivering. "You fix ship? Why help?" Ryan shrugged. "Why not? You seem lost, and I'm not in the habit of leaving people, or aliens, stranded." Her mistrust lingered, but exhaustion seemed to weigh on her. She lowered the device, though her large, glimmering eyes stayed locked on him, as if trying to decipher his intentions. Nimala hesitated for what felt like an eternity, her tiny figure trembling against the cool night air. The sparks from her device had subsided, but her distrust remained etched in her expression. Ryan waited patiently, his calm demeanor making her cautiously lower her guard. "I cannot fix it," she admitted at last, her voice barely audible over the hum of her damaged spacecraft. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time, Ryan saw the weight of her fear. She was stranded, vulnerable, and alone on a planet she clearly didn't trust. "Well, then it's a good thing you ran into me," Ryan said with a gentle smile, trying to lighten the mood. "I'm not exactly an engineer, but I know my way around machines." Nimala's eyes narrowed, the faint glow from her skin pulsating like a heartbeat. "Why help?" she asked, her tone laced with suspicion. "What you want from me?" Ryan thought for a moment. How could he explain? He didn't know why he wanted to help her. Perhaps it was her fragility or the raw vulnerability in her eyes. Or maybe, deep down, he knew what it was like to feel out of place, like you didn't belong. "I don't want anything," he said honestly. "Sometimes, it's just the right thing to do. Besides," he glanced at the strange ship and added with a playful grin, "I've never fixed an alien spacecraft before." "That sounds like an adventure." Nimala tilted her head, her glowing eyes studying him intently. Finally, she gave a small, hesitant nod. "You, strange human," she murmured, but there was a faint softness to her voice now, a sliver of trust beginning to form. Ryan stood, brushing dirt from his jeans. "Let's start by taking a look at the ship," he said. He extended a hand toward her, but she flinched and took a step back. "Sorry," he said quickly, dropping his hand. "I'll keep my distance." Nimala seemed to appreciate the gesture, though she followed him warily as he approached the ship. The closer he got, the more he realized just how intricate and alien the craft was. Its smooth, silvery surface shimmered like liquid mercury, and faint symbols etched along its hull glowed softly. "This is incredible," Ryan whispered, running a hand just above the surface, careful not to touch it. "What kind of technology is this?" Nimala didn't answer right away. Instead, she crouched beside a small panel that was hanging loose, sparks flying from within. Core is breaking, she said, her tone troubled. Power low. Cannot fly. Ryan knelt beside her, examining the exposed circuits. It was like nothing he'd ever seen, organic and mechanical elements woven together seamlessly. Still, he could spot similarities to Earth technology, and that gave him a sliver of hope. I think I can help stabilize it, he said after a moment, glancing at her. But I'll need some tools. Nimala's eyes widened in alarm. Leave. You, come back. Ryan paused, realizing how much she feared being abandoned. I'll come back, he said firmly. I promise. My house isn't far. I'll grab what I need and return before you know it. She didn't look convinced but reluctantly nodded. Fast, she whispered. Please. Back at his cabin, Ryan rummaged through his workshop, gathering everything he thought might be useful. His mind raced with questions. Who was Nimala? Why was she here? And most importantly, was he making a mistake trusting her? But every time he pictured her wide, fearful eyes, he pushed those doubts aside. She needed help, and he couldn't turn his back on her. When he returned to the clearing, he found Nimala sitting cross-legged near the ship, her tiny figure silhouetted against the glowing hull. Her head snapped up when she heard him, and for a brief moment, her expression softened, as if relieved he'd kept his word. You are back, she said, standing quickly. Fast. Told you I'd come back, Ryan said, dropping the toolbox with a clatter. Now, let's see what we can do. As he worked, Nimala hovered nearby, her gaze flitting between him and the ship. She seemed fascinated by his movements, her initial wariness slowly giving way to curiosity. At one point, she crouched beside him, her tiny hands carefully holding a tool he'd handed her. You know machines? Ryan asked, glancing at her. Some, she replied, her voice soft. But, this ship too complex. Needs core energy. Ryan nodded, though he didn't fully understand. We'll figure it out together, he said, his voice steady. You're not alone in this. The words seemed to affect her. She looked at him, her glowing eyes shimmering with an emotion he couldn't quite place. For the first time, she smiled, a small, fleeting smile that made her seem less alien and more like a scared, lost girl. You, kind, she said quietly. Not like stories. What stories? Ryan asked, curious. Stories of humans, Nimala explained, her voice barely above a whisper. Big, cruel. Devour small ones like me. Ryan couldn't help but laugh, though he quickly caught himself. Well, I hate to disappoint, but I don't think humans are as scary as those stories make us out to be. Nimala tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. You, different. Gentle. Ryan felt a warmth spread through him at her words, though he brushed it off quickly. Let's focus on getting your ship fixed, he said, returning to the task at hand. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing between them, a fragile connection, like a thread being spun in the quiet night. Hours passed, and despite their efforts, the ship remained grounded. Nimala grew more restless, her fear returning in waves. If no fix, I stay here forever, she asked, her voice trembling. Ryan set down his tools and looked at her. You won't be stranded, he said firmly. If we can't fix the ship tonight, you can stay with me until we figure it out. Her eyes widened in surprise. Stay? With human? Why not? He said with a shrug. You're not the only one who feels out of place, you know. Maybe we can help each other. Nimala stared at him for a long moment before nodding slowly. Okay, she said softly. I trust you. Ryan smiled, and for the first time that night, the tension eased. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The cabin was modest but warm, tucked deep within the forest where the air smelled of pine and earth. Ryan pushed open the creaky wooden door and motioned for Nimala to step inside. She hesitated on the threshold, her luminous eyes scanning the dimly lit interior as if searching for hidden dangers. It's safe, Ryan assured her with a soft smile. No traps. Just a home. Cautiously, Nimala stepped in, her small, delicate feet making barely a sound on the wooden floor. Her glowing lavender skin stood out starkly against the earthy tones of the cabin. She paused, looking around at the shelves stacked with books, tools, and trinkets from a life lived in quiet solitude. What is this place? She asked, her melodic voice breaking the silence. My home, Ryan said simply, setting his toolbox on the workbench. It's not much, but it's comfortable. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. Nimala wandered cautiously, her fingers brushing against the edge of a worn table. You live here alone. For the most part, Ryan admitted. I like the quiet. No one to bother me, no one to judge. It's peaceful. She tilted her head, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. You alone like me. The words struck a chord in Ryan. He nodded, his voice quieter now. Yeah. I guess we have that in common. Nimala lowered herself onto a chair, her small figure looking almost comically out of place in the oversized furniture. She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Why you choose this? No other humans. Ryan shrugged, leaning against the counter. People can be complicated. I needed space to figure things out. This place helps me breathe. Nimala seemed to ponder his words, her expression softening. I understand, she said finally. My home, far. Crowded. Too many rules. Always watching, always fearing. Here, she gestured toward the window, where moonlight filtered through the trees. Quiet. Peace. Ryan chuckled softly. Sounds like you were looking for the same thing I was. She didn't respond, but a faint smile tugged at her lips. It was fleeting but genuine, and for the first time, she seemed to relax. As the night deepened, Ryan prepared a simple meal. Nimala watched with a mix of curiosity and suspicion as he worked, her large eyes following every movement. When he placed a bowl of steaming soup in front of her, she sniffed it cautiously, her expression skeptical. It's just vegetable soup, Ryan said, amused by her hesitation. No alien ingredients, I promise. Nimala picked up the spoon awkwardly, her small fingers struggling to hold it properly. Her first sip was tentative, but her eyes widened in surprise. This, warm. Tastes, strange but good. Glad you like it, Ryan said, his smile widening. It's not much, but it'll keep you going. They ate in companionable silence, the crackling of the fire the only sound in the room. Nimala seemed to grow more at ease with each passing moment, her initial fear slowly giving way to curiosity. She began asking questions, about Earth, about humans, and about Ryan himself. Why you no leave this place? She asked, tilting her head. Ryan hesitated. It was a question he'd avoided asking himself for years. I guess it's easier this way, he said finally. The world out there can be harsh. People can be cruel. Here, I don't have to deal with any of that. Nimala studied him, her glowing eyes piercing. Not all humans cruel, she said softly. You, kind. Ryan looked at her, surprised by the earnestness in her voice. Thanks, he said, his tone lighter. But I think you're just saying that because I gave you soup. She laughed, a soft melodic sound that seemed to fill the room with warmth. Maybe, she teased, her smile lingering. Later, as they sat by the fire, Nimala grew quiet, her gaze distant. You asked why I came here, she said suddenly. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. I ran away. Ryan looked at her, sensing the weight behind her words. Why? My people, she paused, searching for the right words. They, small like me. Fragile. Always hiding, always fearing. No freedom. I wanted to see stars, to feel alive. But now, she glanced down at her hands, her voice faltering. Now I am lost. Trapped. You're not trapped, Ryan said gently. We'll fix your ship. You'll find your way. She looked at him, her glowing eyes shimmering with emotion. You believe this? I do, he said firmly. But until then, you're not alone. We'll figure it out together. Her expression softened, and for a moment, the wall she'd built around herself seemed to crumble. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. Ryan smiled, feeling a strange warmth spread through him. It wasn't just gratitude he saw in her eyes, it was trust, fragile but growing. And as the fire crackled between them, he realized that this strange, unexpected encounter had brought something into his life he hadn't felt in years. Connection. That night, Nimala slept curled up in a makeshift bed near the fire, her small figure wrapped in one of Ryan's oversized blankets. He watched her for a moment, marveling at how something so alien could seem so human. Her fear, her curiosity, her longing for freedom, It all mirrored his own struggles in ways he hadn't expected. As he lay down on the couch, his thoughts drifted. He had no idea what the future held or how long Namala would stay, but one thing was clear. His quiet, solitary world had been changed forever. And somehow, he didn't mind. The days passed in a quiet rhythm, with Ryan and Namala settling into an unspoken routine. By day, they worked together to repair the ship, combing through the dense forest for materials Namala claimed might substitute for her ship's damaged core. By night, they shared stories by the fire, their bond deepening with every word. For someone so small, Namala had a fierce determination. She would climb trees to fetch rare sap she insisted could stabilize circuits or scour the ground for peculiar minerals, her tiny figure darting through the underbrush like a sprite. Ryan couldn't help but admire her resilience. "You never give up, do you?" he said one afternoon as they returned to the cabin with their haul of scavenged supplies. Namala glanced up at him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "If give up, I stay lost forever. My people, wait for me. I must try." Her words struck a chord in Ryan. "That's brave," he said quietly. "But you don't have to carry it all on your own. I'm here." She looked at him, her glowing eyes softening. "You, strange human," she said, her voice laced with warmth. "But, good strange." One evening, as they sat by the fire after a long day of work, Namala turned to Ryan, her expression thoughtful. "Your turn," she said, her melodic voice breaking the silence. "My turn for what?" Ryan asked, raising an eyebrow. "You know my story," she said, tilting her head. "But I not know yours. Why you here? Alone?" Ryan hesitated. He wasn't used to sharing his past, especially not with someone he'd only just met, someone who wasn't even human. But Namala's gaze was steady, her curiosity genuine. For the first time in years, he felt like he could let his guard down. "I used to live in the city," he began, his voice low. "I had a job, friends, a life that looked normal. But I didn't feel like I belonged. People wanted me to be someone I wasn't. To fit into a mold, to play by rules I didn't understand." He paused, staring into the flickering flames. "One day I just walked away. I packed a bag, came out here, and never looked back. I thought I'd find peace in the quiet, but—" He trailed off, his words hanging heavy in the air. Namala leaned forward, her glowing eyes fixed on him. "But lonely," she said softly. Ryan nodded, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, lonely." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled, casting shadows that danced across the cabin walls. Then, Namala reached out, her small hand brushing against his. It was a tentative gesture, but it carried a warmth that surprised him. "You know lonely now," she said simply. Ryan looked at her, his chest tightening at the sincerity in her voice. "No," he said quietly. "I guess I'm not." As the days turned into weeks, Ryan and Namala grew inseparable. She marveled at Earth's simple wonders, the way sunlight filtered through the trees, the chirping of birds at dawn, the feel of rain on her skin. Ryan found himself seeing the world through her eyes, rediscovering beauty in things he'd long taken for granted. One afternoon, they sat by the river that wound through the forest, their latest scavenging expedition forgotten for the moment. Namala crouched by the water's edge, her delicate fingers skimming the surface. Her reflection shimmered, her lavender skin glowing softly in the dappled sunlight. "This place, beautiful," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "Not like my home. There, all is metal and stone. No trees, no rivers. Just walls." Ryan lay back on the grass, watching the clouds drift lazily overhead. "It sounds lonely," he said, echoing her earlier words. Namala nodded, her expression somber. "We live close, but always apart. No touch, no trust. Always watching, always fearing. Here feels free." He turned his head to look at her. "You deserve that freedom," he said. "Everyone does." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, the air between them seemed to hum with unspoken understanding. "You make me feel free," she said softly. The words hung in the air, their weight sinking into Ryan's chest. He sat up, his gaze steady. "And you've reminded me what it feels like to connect," he admitted. "To care." Namala smiled, a small, shy smile that lit up her face. "Maybe We both help each other. Ryan couldn't help but grin. Yeah, he said, his voice warm. Maybe we do. That night, as they returned to the cabin, Ryan found himself thinking about how much his life had changed since Namala's arrival. The solitude he'd once cherished now felt empty in comparison to the laughter and warmth she brought. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he didn't want to go back to the way things were. As they settled by the fire, Namala glanced at him, her expression serious. Ryan, she began, her voice hesitant. Yeah, he said, turning to her. I not just run from home, she admitted. I run because different. My people, they fear me. Ryan frowned. Why would they fear you? She hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. Because I dream. I want more than what they allow. They say dangerous. Dangerous. Ryan repeated, his tone incredulous. You? Namala nodded, her glowing eyes downcast. I want freedom, adventure. They say selfish. Reckless. Ryan reached out, gently placing a hand over hers. You're not dangerous, Namala. You're brave. You're curious. And those aren't bad things. They're what make you extraordinary. Her gaze lifted to meet his, her expression filled with a mix of hope and vulnerability. You mean that? Every word, he said firmly. For a moment, she just looked at him, her glowing eyes shimmering with unspoken emotion. Then she smiled, a smile so radiant it seemed to light up the room. Thank you, Ryan, she said softly, for seeing me. And as the fire crackled between them, Ryan realized that Namala wasn't the only one who had found something extraordinary. She had brought light into his life, and he wasn't ready to let it go. The days had a rhythm now, a balance that felt almost natural. Ryan and Namala worked tirelessly to repair the ship, but their efforts weren't just about fixing broken machinery. With each day spent together, they were also mending something inside themselves, something neither had realized was broken. Namala's laugh had become a regular part of Ryan's days, her melodic voice cutting through the stillness of the forest. He found himself looking forward to her little quirks, how she tilted her head when she didn't understand something, or the way her glowing eyes lit up when she discovered something new. One morning, as they worked by the clearing, Namala paused and looked up at the sky. Her expression shifted, a mixture of longing and uncertainty. You miss home? Ryan asked, noticing her distant gaze. Namala hesitated before nodding. Some parts. Family. Friends. She glanced at him, her voice softer. But not the rules. Not the fear. Here I feel alive. Ryan smiled at her words. Then maybe you found more than just another planet. Maybe you found what you were looking for. Her gaze lingered on him, something unspoken passing between them. And you, she asked. What you feel now? Ryan thought for a moment, the question catching him off guard. I feel like I don't want this to end, he admitted. Like I've found something I didn't even know I was missing. Namala's expression softened, her glowing eyes shimmering. I feel same, she said quietly. You make this place feel like home. That night, as they sat by the fire, the conversation turned deeper. Namala asked Ryan about the people he'd left behind, the friends, the life he'd walked away from. I didn't fit, he explained, staring into the flames. They wanted me to be someone I wasn't. I couldn't pretend anymore. Namala nodded, her own memories surfacing. Same for me, she said. On my world, they tell us who we are. No choice, no freedom. Different. Always asking questions, always wanting more. And they didn't like that. Ryan guessed. They feared it, she said simply. To them, curiosity is dangerous. It makes you unpredictable. Ryan shook his head. That's not dangerous. That's being alive. Namala smiled at his words, the firelight dancing across her delicate features. You understand, she said softly. More than anyone. For a moment, they sat in silence, the crackling fire filling the space between them. Then, without thinking, Ryan reached out and took her hand. Her skin was warm and soft, her fingers delicate as they intertwined with his. I don't want you to feel alone anymore, he said, his voice steady. Not while you're here. Namala looked at him, her glowing eyes brimming with emotion. I not feel alone with you, she whispered. As the days turned into weeks, the repairs to the ship neared completion. The damaged core remained the only obstacle, but Nirmala seemed hopeful they would find a solution. Despite the progress, a sense of inevitability loomed over them. Nirmala's departure was no longer a distant thought but an approaching reality. One evening, as they sat together by the river, Ryan found himself struggling to speak. Nirmala, sensing his hesitation, tilted her head. "You, quiet tonight," she said softly. Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've been thinking about what happens when you leave." Her expression grew somber, her small hands resting on her lap. "I think of this too," she admitted. "It hurts." Ryan turned to her, his chest tightening. "You've changed my life, Nirmala. I don't know what I'll do when you're gone." She reached out, her hand brushing against his. "I feel same," she said. "But my people, they wait for me. I cannot stay." He nodded, though the thought of losing her made his heart ache. "I know. And I'd never ask you to give up your freedom. But I'll miss you." Nirmala's glowing eyes met his, shimmering with unshed tears. "I miss you too," she whispered. For a long moment, they simply sat there, the sound of the river filling the silence. Then, slowly, Nirmala leaned closer, her delicate features lit by the fading sunlight. Her touch was light as she rested her forehead against his, a gesture that felt intimate and profound. "Thank you," she said softly, "for showing me kindness, for making me feel seen." Ryan closed his eyes, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've done the same for me." The next day, Nirmala announced that she believed she had found a way to stabilize the core. Ryan helped her carry the final pieces of equipment to the clearing, his movements slower than usual. Each step felt heavier, knowing this could be the last time they worked together. As they finished the final adjustments, Nirmala stepped back, her small figure glowing faintly in the moonlight. "It is ready," she said, her voice trembling. Ryan swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "Then it's time." She looked at him, her glowing eyes filled with both gratitude and sorrow. "I never forget you, Ryan." "Same here," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You'll always have a place here, if you ever come back." Nirmala stepped closer, her small hands reaching for his. "Goodbye, my friend." He smiled, though his heart ached. "Goodbye, Nirmala." As the ship powered up, its soft hum filling the clearing, Ryan watched as Nirmala climbed aboard. The hatch closed, and for a moment, the clearing was filled with light as the ship lifted off, rising into the starry sky. Ryan stood there long after the light had faded, the forest around him silent once more. Though she was gone, he felt her presence lingering, a warmth that would never leave. And as he turned back toward the cabin, he realized that while she had left, she had also given him something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Ryan's days returned to their quiet rhythm, but the world felt different now. The forest seemed more alive, the stars brighter, as if the universe itself carried traces of Nirmala's presence. Yet, despite the renewed appreciation he found in his surroundings, an ache remained, an emptiness where her laughter, her glowing eyes, and her curious questions had been. Weeks turned into months, but Ryan never stopped glancing at the sky. Every evening, he stood outside the cabin, staring up at the stars, wondering where she was and if she thought of him too. One clear night, as the crickets chirped in the stillness, a familiar shimmer lit up the sky. At first, Ryan thought he was imagining it. But the light grew brighter, and a soft hum filled the air, the same hum he had come to recognize. His breath caught as a sleek, silvery spacecraft descended into the clearing. The hatch opened, and there she was, Nirmala, standing in the moonlight, her lavender skin glowing softly. She was different now, her stance more confident, her smile radiant. "Nirmala," Ryan whispered, his voice barely audible. She stepped toward him, her small figure silhouetted against the glowing ship. "I told you I would miss you," she said softly. "And I realized I could not stay away." Ryan stared at her, disbelief and joy warring within him. "But your people, your home?" "I went back," she said, her voice steady. "I told them what I found here, what I learned about humans. About you." They listened. And now, she gestured toward the ship. "I am free. Free to choose." He took a step closer, his chest tight with emotion. "And you chose to come back." Her glowing eyes shimmered, and she nodded. Yes. I chose you. The words hung in the air, their weight sinking into Ryan's heart. Without thinking, he closed the distance between them, his arms enveloping her in a gentle embrace. She melted into him, her small frame fitting perfectly against his. You don't know how much this means to me, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I think I do, she replied, her melodic voice warm. Because it means the same to me. From that moment on, their lives were no longer solitary. Together, they built something new, something that blended their worlds in ways neither could have imagined. Nimala introduced Ryan to the wonders of the stars, taking him on journeys across the galaxy, while Ryan shared with her the simple joys of Earth, its forests, rivers, and endless skies. They weren't just two beings from different worlds anymore. They were partners, explorers, and something more, something unspoken yet deeply understood. And as they stood side by side, staring at the infinite cosmos, they knew one thing for certain. They had found in each other not just companionship, but a love that transcended the stars. The end.